morning of 19th of February 2006, a four-man mine rescue team walked into a sealed portal on the backside of a mountain in Boone County, West Virginia. The portal had been grouted shut and boarded over in the fall of 1987. For 19 years, nobody had gone past the timber. There was no reason for anybody to. The captain of that team that went in was Ronnie Sipple. He was 49 years old and he had been going underground since he was 17. Behind him that morning were three other men: Del Farmer, 38, Gary Combs, 44, and the youngest of them, Junior Muncy, who was 26 and had a wife and a baby girl waiting in a rented house in Danville. Four men went past the broken timber that morning, but only two of them came back out.
The team came out short of the count they went in with. Within 4 days, the state had a contractor back on that hillside pumping grout into the portal and stacking crushed rock across the mouth of it until there was nothing left to see but a scar in the mountain. The paperwork that came out of it months later called the whole thing an unauthorized entry by trespassers. There is an incident narrative on file with the mine safety agency that covered that district. Most of it is dry. Air readings, roof conditions, the standard language a federal document uses to say nothing at all. But the narrative has an annex, and the annex is redacted. The pages are there. The words on them are blacked out in long, unbroken bars, the way words get blacked out when somebody decides the public is better off not reading them. What follows is the account of one of the two men who walked back out into the daylight that afternoon. He carried it for a long time before he said any of it out loud. Some of what he describes lines up with the record. Some of it lines up only with the parts of the record that nobody is allowed to read. I was on that team. I was the one who kept the count. Let me tell you about the mountain first, because you have to understand that nobody who grew up around there thought of that hillside as ordinary ground. Not before us, and not because of us. The operation up there had been a small one, a drift mine, which just means the seam ran into the side of the hill and you walked in on the level instead of riding down a shaft. It had opened sometime in the 50s and it had closed and reopened more than once, the way small mines do when the price of coal goes up and down. The last time it closed for good was 1987. After that, the company that held the permit sealed the main portal and a couple of old air courses and let the woods take the rest. Before all that, though, the hillside had a name in the hollows below it, and it was not a good one. My grandfather hunted that country, and he would not run dogs above the old rail grade. He never gave me a straight reason. He would just say the dogs didn't like it up there, and he wasn't going to argue with a dog about a thing the dog understood better than he did. You heard stories your whole life if you were from down in that end of the county. Little ones. Nothing you would repeat to a man you wanted to keep respecting you. There was a fellow named Carl Adkins who ran a four-wheeler up an old haul road in the summer of 1994. And he told anybody who would listen that he heard knocking coming off the high wall above the sealed portal. Not a rock falling. A knock and then an answer to it from somewhere further along the face. He turned that machine around and he came down the mountain faster than the road wanted him to. And he had a scar on his forearm the rest of his life from laying it into a locust tree on the way down. There were two brothers, coon hunters, who had a night up on that grade around the same stretch of years. Good dogs, dogs that would treat anything with a heartbeat. Those dogs got to a certain point on the old grade and they sat down, would not go on, would not be pushed. The brother said the dogs weren't scared exactly, they were more like waiting, ears up, looking at a piece of dark woods where there was nothing to look at. The men went home. They didn't hunt that side of the mountain again. And there was a woman, Vernon Hatfield's mother, who lived up on the Ridge Road, and 3 separate times across the 90s, she called her son to say there was a tall man standing at the tree line across her back field in the evening, standing, not walking, watching the house. By the time Vernon drove up there, it was gone every time, and there were never any tracks because the ground was leaves and rock. She wasn't a foolish woman. She stopped calling him about it after the 3rd time, and she started keeping the curtains drawn on that side of the house, and that told him more than the phone calls had. There was an old man named Odell Blevins who had a still up in a hollow on the far side of that mountain back in the days when a man could make a living that way. And Odell told my grandfather once, near the end of his life when there was nothing left to lose by telling it, that he had made an arrangement with whatever was up there. He said it plain, the way old men say things that would sound crazy from anybody younger. He said he left food on a flat rock at the head of his hollow, meat when he had it, and that in the years he did that nothing ever touched his still and nothing ever touched his dogs, and that on 3 separate nights across those years he had woken to find the meat gone and sitting on the rock where the meat had been, laid out careful, a thing given back. Once a string of trout, gutted, though Odell had no near creek that held trout. Once a double handful of black walnuts, hulled, which is slow, patient work for a set of human hands, and Odell did not think the hands that did it were human. And once, and this is the one that made my grandfather stop asking, a man's pocket knife, old, the bone handle worn smooth, a knife that Odell recognized because it had belonged to a fellow who had gone up that mountain squirrel hunting 2 autumns before and never come down. Odell kept that knife in a drawer and would not carry it and would not throw it away. And when he died, it went in the ground with him because his daughter said he had asked for it too, and she did not ask why. There was a state road crew in 1998 widening the county road that ran along the base of the mountain, and one of them, a young fellow named Harold Estep, left an account with the county that got filed and forgotten. The crew had a night watchman on the equipment because tools had been going missing. Estep pulled that duty, and he wrote in his statement that around 2 a.m. he watched something come down off the mountain and stand at the edge of the light from the work lamps, out past the reach of the glow, tall on 2 legs, and stand there a long time doing nothing, just watching the parked machines and the man watching it back. Estep did not report it stealing anything. He reported that after that night, the tools stopped going missing, as if whatever had been taking them had gotten a look at the guard and lost interest, or had come down to see who the new man on the mountain was, and having seen, decided he wasn't worth the bother. Estep quit the road crew inside the month. He told the foreman it was the pay. The foreman wrote in the margin of the file that it was not the pay. The deer left that hillside. That's the kind of thing that doesn't make a story on its own, but the men who hunted it noticed. The sign just moved off, year by year, until there wasn't any reason to walk up there with a rifle anymore. Animals will do that. They'll give a piece of ground to whatever they think owns it, and they won't tell you why, and they're usually right. So that was the mountain, a sealed hole and a bad name and a scatter of small things that grown men had learned not to talk about. None of it had anything to do with us on the 19th of February, or that's what I believed walking in. Here's why we were there at all, because I know that's the first thing you're asking. That winter, a monitoring contractor doing subsidence work in the district picked up a reading off that dead portal that wasn't supposed to be possible. A sealed drift mine is a closed box. The air inside it goes stale and stays stale. It doesn't move. But the instruments were showing air movement at the sealed face, in and out, slow, like the mountain was breathing through a seal that had been solid for 19 years. On top of that, there was a methane ping, which on a sealed mine is a real safety concern because if the seal has failed, then you have got explosive gas venting into open woods where anybody's brush fire could reach it. So it wasn't a rescue. There was nobody alive in there to rescue. Nobody thought there was, and I want to be clear about that. It was a verification. Go up, confirm the state of the seal, take readings, document the condition, recommend a reseal if the old one had failed. Routine confined space work. The kind of thing a rescue team gets sent to do a dozen times a year and never thinks about again. We had the old maps. And that was the first thing that put a little cold spot in my chest before we ever left the truck, though I didn't say anything about it at the time, because I had pulled the closure file for that portal to see what we were walking into. And the closure file from 1987 was short 2 pages, and it had a note in it that the 1987 closure crew had come up 1 man short. The record called it a fall. A man named Roy Sturgill, part of the crew that grouted and boarded the portal in the fall of 1987, had reportedly stepped off into an old winze, an interior shaft, in bad light, and his body had not been recovered because the winze was flooded and unstable, and it was decided that recovering him would cost another life, so they sealed the mine with him in it. That happens. It is grim and it is real, and it is not by itself a ghost story. Men die underground, and sometimes the mine becomes the grave because there is no safe way to bring them out. But I knew a little more about the 1987 closure than the file wanted me to, because there was a man still living down in Danville who had been on that crew, an old miner named Lloyd Baisden. And years after all of this, I went and sat on his porch and let him tell me what the file left out. Baisden was near 90 by then, and he did not have long, and I think he was glad to say it to somebody who would not laugh. He told me that the 1987 crew had not wanted to seal that mine and had said so to the company, and that the company had told them to seal it anyway and to do it fast. He told me that in the last week of that work, the crew had started losing tools and cribbing to the dark, the same as the road crew would 11 years later, and that the men had gotten so they would not go past a certain point in the drift alone. He told me that Roy Sturgill had not simply stepped off into a winze. He told me that Sturgill had gone in one morning ahead of the others to set a charge, and that the others had heard him call out once, not a scream, a call, the way you call to a man you recognize, surprised and almost glad, the way you'd call a name you didn't expect to hear in that place, and then nothing. And when they went in after him, there was no Sturgill, and there was no fall, and there was no winze anywhere near where his voice had come from, and there was, on the rib at that spot, a smear of something and a set of marks up high that no man on the crew would talk about on the walkout. Baisden said the company wrote the winze into the record because a winze is a thing an inspector can accept, and a call in the dark is not. He said they sealed the mine 2 days later, and every man on the crew was glad to see the concrete go in, and not one of them believed for a second that it would hold, and every one of them was right. Baisden told me one more thing at the end when his daughter was calling him in for supper and I was standing to go. He said that Roy Sturgill had a torn ear, left side, a notch out of it from a minecar cable that let go when he was a young man. Baisden said it like it didn't matter, like it was just a thing he remembered about a dead friend, and I said thank you, and I drove home, and I had to pull the truck over twice on the way because my hands would not hold the wheel steady. And I have never told anyone that part until now. And I'm not going to tell you what I think it means because I don't know what I think it means, and the not knowing is the only thing that lets me sleep. But I read that note in the truck on the 19th of February, and I did not like sitting in my chest that we were about to open a mine that had swallowed a man the last time anybody worked it. I told myself that was superstition. I was a professional. I had a job to do. I folded the file and I put it under the seat, and I did not mention it to the 3 men who trusted me to walk them in and walk them back out. The road up was worse than the maps promised. We left the trucks at the bottom of the old grade and walked the last stretch with our gear because nothing with wheels was getting up there. February in those mountains is a wet cold that gets into the seams of you. The trees were bare and black, and the sky was the color of a nickel. Nobody talked much. Combs was humming something under his breath the way he did, and Muncie kept his head down and watched his feet on the ice, and Farmer walked point because Farmer always walked point. We came up over the last rise, and there was the portal, and I stopped, and I felt the three of them stop behind me. The seal was broken. 19 years of grout and heavy timber. The old company had done it right back in 1987. There was concrete poured into the bulkhead in the mouth of the drift, and there were timbers set across the outside of that. Thick, square timbers, the real thing, not the scrap you see on a slapdash job. It had been built to hold the mountain shut for good. And it was broken open. The timbers were not rotted through and fallen in. They were broken, and they were pushed outward. They lay scattered on the apron of ground in front of the portal, out into the leaves, out toward us, as if something had stood on the inside of that seal and pushed until the wood gave and the concrete cracked, and then had kept pushing until there was a hole big enough to matter. Farmer said the word that everybody was thinking, which was that this was wrong, and I told him what I had already started telling myself. Frost heave. 19 winters of water getting into the concrete and freezing and thawing and working it apart. Subsidence, the mountain settling and shearing the bulkhead. There are natural explanations for a seal failing. I said them out loud in my captain's voice, the one that keeps men steady, and I half believed them. I did not have a natural explanation for why the pieces were on the outside. Water and frost push a wall in. A mountain settling drops a wall down. Neither of them throws a square timber 8 feet out into the woods. I saw that, and I logged it, and I put my captain's voice on top of it, and I told them we were going to do the job we came to do. We went in through the broken seal. That was its own thing, and I have to tell it, because a man does not step through a hole that has been pushed outward by something on the far side without every part of him telling him not to. We had to climb over the scattered timbers and squeeze past the cracked lip of the old concrete, and the edges of that concrete where it had failed were not clean breaks. They were worn, rounded, the way stone gets worn where a thing passes it again and again, the way the sill of an old doorway dishes down from 100 years of feet. That break in the seal was not a fresh event. Something had been coming and going through that hole long enough to wear the edges of the concrete smooth, and 19 years is a long time. And I did not do the math on that standing there, but I have done it many times since, and the math says that the seal has been open and used for most of the time it was supposed to have been shut. Inside, the drift took our light and gave back almost nothing. Coal absorbs light. A coal mine is the darkest dark there is, a dark that eats your lamp beam 3 feet off the glass and hands you back a little cone of wet black rock and nothing else. You are never more than that little cone. The dark presses on the edge of it the whole time, and every miner learns to live inside that cone and not think about the pressing dark. And I had lived inside it my whole working life, and I want you to hold that I was a man entirely at home in the dark, so that you understand it was not the dark that got into me that day. It was what the dark had in it. I want to walk you through what happened underground the way it happened in order, because the order is the thing that nobody who wasn't there can quite hold on to. Each piece by itself is nothing, a draft, a sound, a smell. It's the sequence that does it to you. The first thing was the air. You learn air underground. It's a sense you build over years in your skin and in the back of your throat. And a good miner reads a drift by the way the air lays on him. The air in that portal should have been dead. A sealed mine, even a broken one, holds still, heavy, old air that smells of wet rock and nothing else. That's what a closed box gives you. The air in that drift was moving. Not a lot, A slow, steady draw, pulling inward, past us, deeper into the mountain, the way air moves toward an opening on the far side. But there was no far side. This was a drift mine with one way in and one way out, and a sealed dead end somewhere back in the dark. There was nowhere for the air to be going, and yet it went, past my face, steady, patient, like the mountain was pulling a breath in, slow through the hole in its own chest. I told the men it was a temperature differential, cold air outside, warmer air in the workings, convection. That's real, that happens. But convection in a small drift is a lazy thing, a drift and a swirl. And this was a draw, directional, constant, and it did not stop the whole time we were in there. When I think about it now, what bothers me is not that the air moved. It's that it moved the whole time at the same slow rate. In, and it never once breathed back out while we were inside. It only breathed out later, after. The second thing was the sound. Combs called ahead of us to check for a response, the way you do. A loud, clear shout to hear how the drift throws it back. In a tight drift with 40 inches of clearance, which is what the old survey gave us for that stretch, your voice comes back fast and flat and close. The walls are right there. The sound has nowhere to go. Combs shouted and the sound went out, and it did not come back the way it should have. It came back late, and it came back with a long tail on it. The kind of reflection you get in a big room, a chamber, a place with high ceilings and far walls. It came back like Combs had shouted into a cathedral. But the lamp showed us the drift. 40 inches of coal and rock, low enough that Farmer and I were bent over, tight enough that Combs could put a hand on either rib without stretching. That was the space our eyes were in. And our ears were in a different space entirely, a huge one. And the two did not agree, and there is no amount of captain's voice that makes that all right in a man's head. I told them the survey was old. Roof falls, I said. The drifts open up back in there where the roofs come down, made itself a room, and that's what we're hearing. That is a real thing that happens in old mines. I said it, and I believe maybe half of it, and the men nodded because they wanted to believe it too, and because I was the captain and my job was to give them a floor to stand on. The third thing was the equipment. We came to a spot maybe 400 feet in where the 1987 closure crew had staged some of their material and never finished pulling it out. That's normal. When you seal a mine, you leave junk behind, cribbing, a busted pump, coils of hose gone stiff. What wasn't normal was that it was stacked, not fallen, not scattered the way 19 years of nothing leaves things, stacked. The cribbing timbers were laid up in a careful crosshatch, the way a man stacks firewood, except taller than a man, up into the dark past where the lamp wanted to reach. The stiff, old coils of hose were looped and hung on a spike in the rib. There was an order to it that a collapsing mine does not produce. Something in there kept house. Nobody said anything about that one, not even me with my captain's voice. We just looked at it, and Muncie made a small sound in his throat, and we went on, because going back would have meant admitting what going on let us keep not admitting. The fourth thing was the water, and what was in it. There was seepage along the floor of the drift in that stretch, an inch or two of standing water black as ink, cold the way mine water is. We had to walk through it, and I put my lamp down to watch my footing, and that is how I saw the print. It was pressed into the silt at the bottom of the standing water, held there under the still black surface the way a thing gets held in mud that never dries. It was the shape of a foot, not a boot, a bare foot, and I want to tell you it was too big, and it was, but that is not the part that stopped me. The part that stopped me was that the toes had gripped. You could see it in the silt, the way the front of the foot had dug in and curled, the way your own bare foot digs in when you climb a wet bank, the way no boot ever leaves a mark. A living foot, bare, that had walked through that water, gripping the floor like the floor might be taken away, and it had walked in the direction we were walking, deeper toward the drawing air, and its stride was longer than any of ours, and I stepped over it, and I did not tell the men to look down, because there are things you can lead men past and things you cannot lead them past once they have seen, and a gripping bare footprint in water that should not have been walked through in 19 years is one of the things you cannot. The fifth thing was the marks. There were marks on the ribs, the walls, all along that stretch, scores in the coal and the rock. That's not strange in itself. A mine is full of tool marks and scrapes. What was strange was the height of them. They ran in a band up near the roof, in a drift where the roof was 40 inches off the floor. To make a mark at that height, a man would have had to be lying on his back with his arms straight up, and the marks ran on for yards, steady, even at a reach no man on his back could hold. They were made by something moving along that drift upright, in 40 inches of clearance, with its reach up at a height that 40 inches of clearance does not allow. I logged it. I wrote it in the little waterproof book I carried. I did not have a captain's voice for it, so I didn't try one. I just wrote it down, and we kept moving, and the air kept drawing past us, in. The sixth thing was the smell. It came on gradual so that none of us could say when it started. Not a dead smell, not gas, nothing on the instruments, which stayed quiet and clean the whole time. And that's its own wrongness, that the meters had nothing to say about any of it. The smell was animal, rank and warm and living, a den smell. The smell of a big body that has bedded in one place a long time. In a sealed mine that has held nobody but a dead man for 19 years, there's no reason for the air to smell like the inside of something alive. But it did, and it got stronger the deeper we went, and it was strongest where the air was drawing hardest, back toward the dead end that was supposed to be dead. The seventh thing is the one I have the hardest time saying, because it is the one that broke the daylight explanations for good, and it is the one I did wrong. I counted us. That's my job as captain in a confined space. You keep the count. You keep your men. Ever so often, without making a thing of it, you put eyes on each man and you count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and you know where everybody is. I did it out of habit in the dark with the lamps bobbing around me, and I counted 5. 4 lamps I could account for, mine and Farmer ahead and Combs and Muncie behind. And a 5th shape, back past Muncie at the edge of where my lamp died into black, tall, upright, filling the drift from floor to a roof that my own eyes said was only 40 inches high. Standing there in the drawing air where a 5th man could not be, where a 5th man could not stand upright, where there was no 5th man because there were 4 of us and I had walked all 4 in myself. I counted 5 and then I made myself count again, faster, and the 5th was gone. And it was 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, my men, all of them, right where they should be. Reconciled, I told myself I had double counted Muncie's lamp and its reflection off the wet rib. I told myself the tail of my own light had thrown a shadow. I told myself the count was 4 because the count had to be 4. But for 1 second in that dark, the count was 5. And part of me has been standing in that second ever since. And I know, the way you know a thing in your body before your mind will let you have it, that the 5th one had been walking in the dark behind my youngest man for a while before I turned and gave it the count. The 8th thing was the shape at the limit. After the count, I kept my lamp back more, checking the dark behind us, and that's how I saw it clear the one time I saw it clear, if clear is even the word for it, which it isn't. Where the drift bent and my light reached its dying edge, there was a shape standing in the bend. Tall, far taller than the drift had any room for, which meant either the drift had opened into that cathedral space our ears kept insisting on, or the thing was standing in a hole in the world that my eyes couldn't square. It stood the way a man stands on two legs, shoulders squared, and it did not move when the light touched it, and it did not shy from the light the way an animal will. I could not tell you its face. I have tried, and I can't, and I won't make one up for you. The light was at its limit, and the thing was mostly a darkness inside the darkness, a bulk, a height, a stillness that had a front and a back to it. The one thing my lamp gave me before I took the light off it, because every animal part of me needed the light off it, was the edge of its head against what little glow there was, and along the top of that head there was an ear. And the ear had a notch torn out of the left side of it, a clean, old-healed notch, an injury from long ago carried on a living head. That's all, a height, a stillness, and a torn ear. I have given you everything I have, and it is almost nothing, and that is exactly the problem. In the dark, in a 40-inch drift that sounds like a cathedral, with the air pulling your own breath away from you into the deep, you do not get a good look. You get a fragment, and the fragment is worse than a good look would ever be, because your mind spends the rest of your life trying to finish it. The ninth thing was the captain's voice failing, which is to say mine. I gave the order to hold, quiet, the standard thing, and my voice came out of me and went into that drift, and it did not throw back to me at all. It went out, and it was gone, swallowed, no reflection, no tail, nothing. My own men 3 feet away heard me, but the drift did not answer my voice the way it had answered Combs's shout. And I understood, standing there, that the space had changed its mind about how big it wanted to be, and that whatever set the size of that space, it was not the mountain, and it was not physics, and it was paying attention to us. The 10th thing was the knock. Farmer, ahead of me, brought his hammer against the rib, once, hard, an old miner's habit, sounding the roof to check its sound. One knock, and out of the dark ahead of him, from the direction of the dead end, from the direction the air had been pulling toward the whole time, something knocked back. Twice. Deliberate. Spaced. An answer. I have gone over this so many times. A knock underground can be a settling rib, a slab of roof ticking as it cools. 100 natural things. But a settling rib does not wait for you to knock first. A slab of roof does not answer one knock with 2. This came after farmers from ahead toward the drawing air, and it was not one sound but 2 even measured raps, and every man in that drift heard it, and every man in that drift knew that it was an answer, and that there is only one kind of thing that answers. That was when I gave the order to retreat, not because of the knock alone, because of all of it, in order, stacked up in me the way the cribbing had been stacked up in the dark, until the weight of the sequence came down all at once, and my professional mind and my animal mind finally agreed on the one thing they had been arguing about since the broken timbers on the apron, which was that we were not the only thing in that mountain, and we were not welcome, and we were going to be allowed to leave only if we left right now. The 11th thing was the walkout. You would think the walkout would be the easy part, going toward the light. It was the worst of all of it, because the air was at our backs now, pulling in, pulling deeper, pulling against us. And it is a hard thing to describe what it does to a man to walk out of a place while the place itself breathes inward around him, so that every step toward the daylight feels like a step being counted by something that has decided how many steps you are allowed. I put Farmer on point, and I took the rear myself, because the rear was where the count could go wrong, and I was not going to let the count go wrong again. I walked backward half that drift with my lamp on the dark behind us. And I never saw the shape again, but I felt the size of the space behind me the whole way, that cathedral I could not see. And I heard, twice more, far back, spaced and deliberate, the knock. The 12th thing was the count at the portal. We came out into the gray daylight, the four of us, up the apron past the broken timbers, out into the open air where the pulled air finally let go of us, and I could breathe like a man again. And I did what a captain does. I stopped my men on that open ground and I counted them. 3. I counted again. 3. Farmer and Combs and me. Muncie was not there. 26 years old, a wife and a baby girl in a rented house in Danville, walking in the middle of my file where the middle is the safe place to be. And he was not on the apron, and he was not in the mouth of the portal. And when I put my light back down, that drift, and I screamed his name, my voice went into the dark and was swallowed whole, and nothing at all came back. And I understood in the daylight, counting 3 where there should have been 4, that the count in the dark had never been wrong. The count in the dark had been 5 because there had been 5. My 4 and the 1 walking behind my youngest. And somewhere in the pulling dark between the knock and the daylight, in a space that sounded like a cathedral and measured 40 inches, the count had been settled, and the mountain had taken the one it had walked in beside and had let the rest of us keep the number we had left. We did not go back in. I want to tell you we mounted a search, that we did everything, that we tore that mountain open for him. The truth is that Farmer physically held me at the portal mouth, and Combs got on the radio, and by the time there were more men on that hillside, it was full dark, and no crew on this earth was going back down that drift in the dark, after what the 2 of them had felt at my back and could not explain to the men who had not been there. A recovery went in the next day in daylight, with numbers and lights and everything the state could bring. They went 400 feet to where the cribbing had been stacked, and the cribbing was not stacked anymore. It was fallen and scattered, ordinary, 19 years of nothing. And past that, the drift was choked with fresh fall, roof come down floor to ceiling, a plug of rock and coal where the open drift had been the day before, and no way through it, and no sound behind it, and no air moving at all. The engineers who looked at that fall could not date it. That was in the report, and then it was not in the report, if you follow me. One of them, a young engineer named Bill Coleman, who I talked to before the state moved him to another district, told me the fall was fresh, hours old, the broken faces of the rock still bright and unweathered, and that a fall that size in that spot should have registered on the seismic monitors the subsidence people had running on that mountain all winter, and that it had not registered on anything. A roof coming down floor to ceiling across a whole drift is not a quiet event. It is the loudest thing a mountain does, and the instruments that had picked up air moving through a sealed seal from a mile off had recorded nothing at all. At the moment, a section of that same drift supposedly came down and sealed my youngest man behind it. Coleman said it the way a man says a thing he has decided to stop thinking about. Then he said that the fall had come down clean, squared off, more like a thing set in place than a thing collapsed. And then he looked at me and did not say anything else. And a week later, he was in another district, and when I called the number I had for him, it belonged to somebody else. They searched the mountain above in case Muncie had somehow come out an air course and wandered. They ran dogs. The dogs did on that hillside exactly what the coonhounds had done up on the old grade all those years before. They got to a point on the ground above the sealed portal, and they sat down and would not go on, and the handlers wrote it up as the dogs alerting on the scent going into the sealed workings, which is the professional way to say the dogs knew something was down there and had decided, the way animals decide, that going to it was not survivable. They called the search after the second day. There was no third day. A man named Denver Justice, who ran the county's end of it, told the family that the terrain and the mine hazard made further search unsafe, And that was true, and it was also the smallest true thing that could be said, which by then I had learned was how that whole mountain got talked about in the smallest true things with the rest blacked out. The seal opened from the inside, and then when it was done, the mountain closed itself back up, and it did it in a night, and it left my youngest man on the far side of the fall. Here's what the record says. The Mine Safety Agency incident narrative for that event describes a verification entry to a sealed portal, notes the pre-existing failure of the 1987 seal, records the recovery of no remains, and attributes the breach of the seal to unauthorized entry by trespassers at some undetermined point prior to the team's arrival. It recommends and documents the resealing of the portal, which was completed within 4 days by grout injection and rock closure. The narrative does not explain how trespassers broke a reinforced 1987 bulkhead outward. It does not explain the marks on the ribs at a height no man could reach. It does not explain the air. It does not mention the knock, because I did not put the knock in my statement, because I had a wife too. And I wanted to keep being a man people sent underground to bring their sons home. And a captain who talks about answering knocks in the dark does not stay that man for long. Within 4 days, there was a contractor back on that hillside. I know because I drove up and watched from a distance from the old grade because I could not stay away. They ran a grout line down into the portal and they filled it. And they brought in rock and they closed the mouth, and they did in 4 days what the 1987 crew had done in a week. And they did it with the same certainty that it would not hold. You could see it in how fast they worked and how little they looked at the dark while they worked. Men filling in a hole they did not want to be standing next to when the light went. When they were done, there was a scar in the mountain and a fresh face of crushed rock and nothing to say that a drift had ever run back into that hill, or that a man named Junior Muncie was on the far side of it, where his wife could never bury him, where his daughter would grow up knowing only that her father went to work one morning and the mountain kept him. I went to see her once, his wife, years later. I did not tell her most of what I have told you. I told her that Junior did not suffer, which I do not know, and which I said because it was the kindest lie I had, and because a captain who loses a man owes the family something even if all he has left to give is a lie. She thanked me. And then she said a thing I have never gotten out from under. She said that the baby, who was grown by then, had never once in her life been able to sleep in a dark room. Not as an infant, not as a child, not as a woman. That she had to have a light, that she had never been able to say why, only that the dark was not empty to her the way it was to other people. That the dark had something in it that knew her. And that she had felt that way as far back as she could remember, which was as far back as the winter her father did not come home. I drove down off that mountain for the last time after that, and I have never gone back, and I never will. And the narrative has an annex, and the annex is redacted. I have never seen what is under the black bars, but I know the annex is where the 1987 loss lives because I saw the unredacted page count, and I saw where the closure file went short by 2 pages, and I know that Roy Sturgill went into that mountain in 1987 and did not come out, and Junior Muncie went into that same mountain in 2006 and did not come out, and that both times the state came and sealed it fast and wrote down the smallest true thing it could and blacked out the rest. 19 years apart. The same drift, the same seal, broken outward and sealed again. 1 man short and 1 man short.
I don't know what lives in the mountains of Boone County, but I know it was there before the mine, and it was there while men worked the mine, and it was there in the 19 years the mine was sealed, and it will be there long after the last of the men who walked in the mine that morning is gone. Whatever is in there, Keep it there, sealed shut, and do not approach. Real or fake, you decide. On the 14th of October 2011, a man named Everett Pruitt drove his truck to a trailhead on the edge of a national forest in the Cascade foothills and walked up into the timber to glass a slope he had been watching all season. He was 52 years old. He was careful, experienced, and by every account of the man who knew him, not a sort to spook or exaggerate or get himself lost. He had done this 1,000 times. His truck sat at the trailhead for 9 days before anyone thought to check it. When the Forest Service and the county finally went up the mountain after him, they found the truck, and off the trail they found his pack, and inside the pack they found his field notebook and the camera. They did not find Everett Pruitt. They never found him. After 9 days, the search was scaled down and then called off, and the county recorded him as lost, presumed dead from exposure, which is the phrase they use when a man walks into the woods and the woods keep him. The camera and the notebook came back down the mountain. Almost everything I am going to tell you comes from those two things, from a careful man's own hand and his own lens, and from a season of him writing down what he saw on a slope where he thought he was the one doing the watching.
I am his brother. I transcribed the notebook. I have read it more times than is good for me. You have to understand what kind of man Everett was, because the whole thing turns on it. He was not a believer in anything. He was a machinist by trade and a hunter by everything else, and he approached the woods like a machinist, with tolerances and measurements and a deep impatience for anybody who guessed when they could know. He logged wind, he logged range, paced or range with a finder, never estimated. He logged light. His notebooks going back 30 years are the least dramatic documents you will ever read. And that is exactly why the last one frightens me the way it does. Because the same flat, careful hand that logged wind for 30 years logged this, and it did not know it was writing a horror story until it was almost done. We grew up together in a house where our father hunted and our father's father hunted, and nobody in the family had ever once come home with a story that couldn't be measured. That was the whole culture of us. You did not exaggerate the size of a buck. You did not round up a range. A man who came in claiming 40 yards when it was 60 got laughed at until he stopped doing it, and Everett had never in his life given anybody cause to laugh. When we were boys, he was already the one who paced things off to be sure. I was the dreamer of the two of us, and he was the one who checked. It matters that you understand this, because when I tell you what is in that notebook, you are going to want to reach for the easy answer, which is that a man alone in the woods too long started seeing things, and I am telling you that if there was one man in the state of Oregon whose eyes and whose hand you could trust against that easy answer, it was my brother. And I have spent years trying to find the place where his account breaks down into a lonely man's imagination, and I cannot find it because it isn't there. He had glassed that country for years. He knew the far slope the way you know a thing you have looked at 10,000 mornings. That is part of what unsettles me, reading it back, because the early entries of that last season are entries about a place he understood completely, and you can watch, week by week, that understanding come apart in his own handwriting, not because he got confused, but because the place stopped behaving the way 30 years had taught him it behaved, and a careful man notices that faster and takes it harder than a careless one ever could. He had picked that slope in the early fall. It was a good slope. A long, open hillside of grass gone gold with the season, broken by stands of pine, the kind of edge where game moves at dawn and dusk. He set up across the drainage from it in the timber, where a man with glass can sit still and see a long way and not be seen. That was the whole craft of it. See without being seen. The first entries are nothing. Wind, range, a few does, a bull he passed on, ordinary careful days. Then, in the third week, he logged a figure. I want to be careful here, because I told myself I would not do to you what the woods did to him, which is to make a monster out of a shape at distance. He did not at first think it was anything. He logged it the way he logged everything, flatly, a figure on the far slope, at range, upright, that he could not resolve into an elk or a bear or a man, that moved along the timber edge and went into the trees. He noted the range. He noted that it walked upright the whole way. And then he did the most Everett thing in the world, which is that he wrote down that he would need a better look before he said what it was, and he left it at that. That's the trap. And I have come to hate the elegance of it. A careful man will not jump to a conclusion. And so a careful man will go back, and back. And each time he goes back, he sees a little more and concludes a little less. And the not concluding is what keeps him coming day after day up the mountain to the same stand of timber to watch the same gold slope, while on the far side of that drainage, the thing he will not name gets used to him and lets him get used to it, and the distance between them closes so slowly that a careful man logging ranges to the 10th of a yard does not feel himself being drawn in. Because it was not one figure. That's the thing the notebook gives you, slow over pages. In the fourth week, he logged a second. Then, on a clear, cold morning, a third. He was watching a group. He wrote it down as a group. He rationalized the way he would, the way anybody sane would, other hunters working the far slope, a family of bears, elk in flat light, reading wrong through the glass. He wrote all of those down as possibilities, and then, being Everett, he wrote down why each one didn't hold. The wrong gait for elk, the wrong season and behavior for a sow with cubs, no vehicles at the far access, no orange, no sound. He was ruling things out. He didn't notice he was ruling everything out. That the list of what it could be was getting shorter every week, and he had stopped writing at the bottom of it the one thing that was left. There are small things in the notebook from those middle weeks that are worse to me than any big thing would be, precisely because Everett logged them without alarm, the way he logged everything, so that you only feel the weight of them when you read them all in a row. He noted one morning that he had glassed the far slope empty at first light, walked his glass across every foot of it the way he always did, and then looked again 10 minutes later, and there were 3 of them standing in the open in a spot he had just cleared, not walked into from cover, simply there. In ground he had watched be empty. He wrote it down flat, 3 on the near open where the slope read empty at first light. No exclamation, just the fact and the range. He noted another day that he had found where they crossed, a place down in the drainage where the grass was pressed and the ground was soft, and that he had gone down to it, which he should not have done, which broke his own rule about the far side of the drainage being theirs, and his side being his. And that in the soft ground the tracks were not what he expected, and he did not for once write down what they were. He just wrote that he had stood there longer than he meant to, and that he had felt the whole time he stood there that he was being allowed to look, and that the feeling of being allowed was worse than the feeling of being watched, because a thing that watches you might not have made up its mind, and a thing that allows you already has. He noted that his dog would not come with him anymore. He kept a little Feist that had ridden in his truck for 9 years and gone everywhere he went, and there is an entry, short, that says the dog would ride to the trailhead and then would not leave the truck, would not be coaxed, sat in the cab and shook, and that he had started leaving her home. He wrote it the way you write a small inconvenience. Reading it now, I want to reach back through the page and take him by the collar because the dog knew. The dog had known for weeks. The dog had done the oldest and wisest thing an animal can do, which is to refuse the ground. And my brother, my careful measuring brother, logged the animal's terror as a scheduling note and kept driving up the mountain. I'm not going to walk you frame by frame through what he caught on the camera. I've watched it. It is daylight footage, careful and steady the way everything he did was steady. And it shows what the notebook says it shows. Figures on a slope, more than one, upright at the edge of the trees and then not at the edge of the trees. That's as far as I'll take you into it. He would have hated it if I turned his footage into a sideshow, and past a certain point the footage stops mattering anyway, because the horror of it was never in the pictures. It was in the notebook. It was in a careful man's own handwriting getting less careful. Because here's what the entries do across October. The ranges get shorter. That's all. If you read it fast, you'd miss it. But he logged range every single time, 30 years of habit, and the number comes down, week over week. The far slope to the near timber to his own side of the drainage, and there is no entry anywhere where he writes that he moved his stand closer. He didn't move. The range came down because they came down. They crossed the drainage, they came to his side, and he kept logging it in that flat hand. The range this morning, the range this evening, closer, closer, and somewhere in there the tone of it changes, not into fear. Everett didn't have fear in his vocabulary, but into a kind of held stillness, the way your voice goes quiet, and even when you have realized something and you don't want the thing you've realized to hear you realize it. There is an entry a few pages from the end where he wrote that he had understood something about the way they moved. He wrote that all season he had assumed they were feeding on the slope, moving the way animals move when they are working ground for food. And that he had been wrong, that there was no feeding in it, that when he stopped expecting them to behave like animals and simply watched what they did was patrol. He used that word. Patrol. He wrote that they walked the same lines, held the same ground, watched the same approaches, that there was a purpose in it that had nothing to do with eating and everything to do with keeping. That they were not living on that mountain the way a bear lives on a mountain, they were holding it, the way men hold a border, and that somewhere in the third week he had crossed onto ground. They held, and that everything since had been them deciding, slowly, without any hurry at all, what to do about a thing that had wandered inside the line. There is an entry near the end where he stopped ruling things out. He just described what he was watching without a single guess attached to it, for the first time in the whole notebook, and reading that entry is like watching a man set down a tool he has carried his whole life. He wrote that they knew he was there. He wrote that they had known for some time. He wrote that the distance had never been his to set, that he had thought he was choosing how close to get, and he had been wrong about that from the third week on, that the whole season he had believed he was the one watching, and he had been the one watched, and that they had let him come because it suited them to let him come, and that he did not any longer think it suited them. He wrote that they were beautiful. That's in there too, and I don't know what to do with it, and I've decided I have to leave it in because it's his word and he wasn't a man who used it. He watched them all season in the gold light, and the last clear thing he set down about them before the entry's end is that they were beautiful and that he was afraid, and that both of those were true at once and neither one canceled the other. The last entry is short. He noted the date and the light, and a range, a small range, the smallest in the book, a range at which you are no longer glassing anything, at which you are simply looking at something that is close enough to touch. And then the notebook stops. There is nothing after it. No struggle, no final scrawl, no dramatic last line. Everett was not dramatic. The entries just stop, the way a man stops writing when he has looked up from the page at last, and there is no longer any reason to look back down at it. Here is what the ground says apart from him. The truck sat 9 days. When they found his camp, it was not thrown around, not fought over, not disturbed the way a bear camp gets disturbed. His pack was set down off the trail above his stand, on ground he had no reason to be on, higher and deeper into the timber than a man watching that slope would ever sit, as if he had gotten up from his careful hidden stand and walked on his own feet toward the thing he had spent a season watching, and set his pack down when he got where he was going. The camera was in the pack. It was switched off, not dropped, not smashed, not running out the last of its battery on the forest floor the way a camera does when something goes wrong. Set down and switched off deliberately by a careful man, the way he ended every day in the field. And then nothing, no body, 9 days, and the dogs, and the grid search, and the helicopter, and nobody on a slope where a fallen man does not simply cease to exist. The warden who found the pack was a level-headed woman named Arnett, who had pulled a lot of people, living and dead, off that mountain over the years. And she told me when I drove out to get his things that in 20 years of doing the job, she had never seen a scene that calm. That was her word, calm. A man goes off a trail and dies of exposure, she said, and you find sign of it. You find where he sat down, where he lay down, where the cold got him. You find the story of a body giving up written on the ground. There was none of that. There was a pack set down square on level ground like a man setting it down at the end of an ordinary day. There was a camera in it, switched off. There was the notebook, closed. And there was, above the pack, higher up the slope, a place in the timber where the ground was disturbed, not like a struggle, she said, more like a place where several heavy things had stood together for a while and then moved off, all in the same direction, up and over the ridge, into country. The search never fully worked because the terrain turned bad and the season turned worse. And after 9 days, you are not looking for a man anymore. You are looking for what the mountain left, and the mountain had left nothing. Arnett did not offer me a theory. Wardens don't. But when I signed for his thing, she held onto the notebook a second longer than she needed to before she handed it across. And she said, not looking at me, that she had read some of it, that she'd had to, it was part of the report, and that she wished she hadn't, and that she had asked to be taken off that district, and that the request had been granted without anybody asking her why. Then she gave me my brother's notebook and she shook my hand and she went back to her truck, and I have thought many times that she is one more person who came off that mountain carrying a small true thing and leaving the rest of it up there in the dark under the trees where nobody has to read it. The county wrote exposure. Lost, presumed dead. It is the phrase they have to use, and I don't blame them for it because the true phrase isn't one you can put in a county record. The true phrase is that my brother spent a season believing he was studying something, and it spent that same season letting him. And on the 14th of October, the studying was finished on both sides, and only one of the two parties to it walked back down that mountain, and it wasn't the one holding the camera. They let him come. That's the part I can't put down. Everything careful in him was sure he was in control of the distance, and everything in the notebook proves he never was, not from the 3rd week on. The calm was the trap. The daylight was the trap. The beauty of it in the gold light was the trap. A thing that wanted to run him off would have shown him a monster on day 1 and sent him down the mountain to tell the story. This didn't want him to leave. It wanted him to keep coming, a little closer, a careful man logging. Ranges right up to the range at which there is nothing left to log. I have his notebook. 30 years of the flattest, truest handwriting you ever saw, and one October where the ranges come down and the guesses stop, and a man who never once in his life reached for the word beautiful reached for it at the end, about the thing that was about to keep him.
Real or fake, you decide. I hope you enjoyed these encounter stories. I was Alex, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.